Okay, welcome everybody. My name's Damian Williams and I've been working in ELT for many years, as I'm sure a lot of you have as well. I've lived and worked teaching all over the world in pretty much every continent: Russia, Indonesia, Europe, South America. And as well as teaching, I do teach training on Cambridge University courses such as CELTA and Delta. I'm also an examiner for those courses as well. However, nowadays, I would say about 90% of my time is spent writing course books and course materials. I write for several different publishers, but most of my work, I think, has been for Pearson. And recently, I've just finished working on a new 8-level course book for adults, and it's called Roadmap. Okay, so basically, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about a little bit about the changing situation and the situation it's put us all in over the last year. And then we're going to look at some of the most common challenges we have with online teaching, and particularly from my side of things, the challenges we face when writing materials and knowing what will work, what won't work. Now, the reason I mentioned Roadmap is because most of the main levels of it came out, or finally finalised and published at the beginning of last year, which is obviously not a brilliant time to be publishing materials primarily meant to be used for face-to-face teaching. So since then, we've been doing a lot of work on looking at how we can adapt them for online teaching, whether Zoom or Teams or whatever it is you use. So we're going to look at some of those problems and then some solutions. Then I'm going to show you a few different ways of adapting materials, some of the different free online tools we can use and how to use them. And then to finish up, I'm going to put you into groups in breakout rooms, and I'm going to get you to, I'm going to give you some material, and I'm going to get you to discuss together how you can adapt it. Okay, so let's begin. So I'd like you to discuss, do you write your own materials or use published materials when you're teaching? Or a combination of both. Maybe you use published materials, but you create your own things as additional materials, other things. What online or digital tools, so this could be different websites, it could be things like PowerPoint slides, quite simply. What do you use in online lessons? And what for you are the main challenges that you face when delivering online lessons? So it could be things like motivating students. A lot of people I've discussed this with have mentioned assessment is difficult. So it could be things like that. So who writes their own materials for online teaching? Okay, we've got a combination. Okay, good. So it looks like there's quite a few people use published materials, what the university provides, or a combination. So that's great. So that's kind of what we're looking at, adapting the materials. So what about the next question? Can you type, what online or digital tools do you use in online lessons? Well, I'm going to share just a couple that I use today, but obviously there are lots out there, and you'll all have your favourites and know what works best in your situation. Okay, so what about the last question? Main challenges you face when delivering online lessons? Mixed ability, yeah. Technical problems, yeah. Motivation. Okay, good. Right, okay, so here is a list that I've come up with. This is by no means exhaustive. It's just things that I've found that I've had. Here we've got things like connection problems, so slow internet or just not being able to connect properly. Also becomes more of a problem when we're trying to do like show videos and do listening activities, that kind of thing, because these things use quite a lot of bandwidth, don't they? Making sure everyone can hear when you're doing a listening, recordings or video as well. Okay, monitoring students. in a classroom, this is quite easy because you can, even when you're kind of monitoring a bit of pair work over here, you can still kind of keep an ear out here for what they're saying. And you've always got this kind of overview, which you don't have so much in breakout rooms. Setting up pair and group work, because again, that's the thing. When you're teaching face to work, you set up an activity, so off you go, they do it, but then you can still keep an eye on them. And if they haven't quite got the instructions, you can kind of jump in and clarify that kind of thing. Big problem I've found is providing opportunities to compare answers before feedback to activities. So what I normally do in a face-to-face classroom is, let's say I want students to do an exercise, it's a gap fill practicing a tense. I'll ask them to do it alone, and then before we go through the answers, I'll say, okay, just compare answers with the person next to you. Now, this is possible with breakout rooms, but if you're doing that for every activity, by the time you set up each breakout room, it just takes too long to do. And you find a lot of the lesson becomes this dead time while you're setting up breakout rooms and making sure everyone's in them, working away and everything. Monitoring students' writing. Again, face-to-face, this is much easier. We can walk around, see what they're doing, offer corrections. We can jump in and like be on hand to help with vocabulary questions, things like that. Pronunciation work. Now, in particular, I'm thinking drilling, when you ask students to repeat after you. Online, this is really difficult because, especially a platform like Zoom, because it will only play the person who's speaking at the time. So it's very difficult to get this kind of common rhythm going where everybody's repeating and being able to hear them, what they say when they repeat after you. Access to materials while in breakout rooms. Now, what I'm doing in this is I'm uploading these files to the chat box for you to download and then use while you're in the breakout rooms. Assessing students' work. This is something I've seen and heard quite a lot and talking to people about this. Maintaining the students' attention, especially when you're instructing activities, making sure everyone's following how you're setting things up. Maintaining motivation, especially, if students are online all day, it's tiring. Online teaching and learning is tiring. You can probably see a family member there, my little dog. She often comes and works with me at the side. Speaking activities when students don't have any ideas. You want them to do something like, come up with this for this, plan a trip to here, and they don't know, they don't have any ideas, or they can't really think of any ideas. So what can we do about connection problems? Okay, so one thing that I've done when there have been genuine connection problems and I've been unable to perhaps play a video or do a listening or something, you can kind of flip the class. And if you know in advance that there are going to be a lot of connection problems, then flipping things is a good way to make better use of classroom time. Okay, so basically if the lesson revolves around some kind of input, it could be based on a video or it could be based on a listening or even a reading. What you do is you get students to do the input stuff at home. So you get them to watch the video or do the listening or read the text with a clear task at home. And then in the class, you're basically doing work that you would do normally anyway, based on that. So you're taking out some of the language to work on and practice, stuff like that. So then when you're actually in the class, you're not relying on using up so much bandwidth. So making sure everyone can hear listenings and recordings. Any solutions to this? One thing I discovered recently was, you remember when we used to teach using cassettes? Remember those, the little rectangular cassette, you put it in a thing and then the tape would come out and you'd put a pencil in to wind it up and stuff. Well, back then, when publishers produced these cassettes to go with the course books, to help the teacher find the right place on the cassette, before each recording, there would be a narration signpost. So it would be, for example, cutting edge, intermediate, lesson 4, recording 16. So those were useful little signposts for the teacher so they could cue everything up before class. Now, one thing I've noticed is with digital materials, the publishers have kind of kept these little narration signposts in. And I was kind of thinking, why? They don't need to hear that. So, for example, let's play one. This is from Roadmap.
Unit 4, Recording 7.
So that little thing there. And you think, well, what's the point of having that? Because you know where it is. But that's actually a great way of checking that students can hear. So you set up your listening activity like this, and then you say,
Unit 4, Recording 7.
Can everyone hear that? And then you don't have to go into the actual listening just by checking their hearing. So it's something that's, again, been kind of repurposed for online teaching. Okay, the next point here was monitoring students. Do you have any ideas for solutions to how to monitor? One thing I've found with online teaching is again, when you're, because camera's not on, quick visits in the breakout rooms, yeah. The problem with that visiting the breakout rooms is your presence is immediately shown there. And when you're monitoring in a face-to-face class, you can be really discreet. You can either kind of go around behind them so they don't know that they're being monitored, or sometimes what I do is I'll be kind of pretending I'm monitoring this pair of students where actually I'm listening out to that pair, because I'm trying to get a kind of natural rather than performed performance. So I think in breakout rooms, when we're in there, I think the best we can do there is just mute ourselves and turn our video off. And that's kind of less of a presence there. Another thing in terms of kind of monitoring progress, if we're asking students to do something on their own, so like here's an exercise, 6 sentences, choose the correct alternatives, work on those on your own, and then we'll go through the answers. Just getting students to type in done when they're finished or finished, because that's the other good thing about monitoring in a face-to-face classroom. We can gauge how many students have finished the activity, and then once about 75–80% of them have finished, we can then stop and finish together and go through the results together, which is something you can't really do online. So just getting them to type done in the chat box, or even just do the little thumbs up symbol on the bottom of their screen can help with that. Okay, so the next one, setting up group or pair work. The main thing here is strong, weak with weak, or strong, weak strong. They consider this as break time, right questions as a group. Yeah, well, I think as long as you're actively monitoring, then you can jump in and kind of help with the discussions. I think the key for me is making sure everyone knows what they're doing before they go in the breakout room, because otherwise then you have to go around and explain. So there's lots of usual checking techniques. If it's an exercise, you could elicit the first answer as an example, or you can ask kind of short checking questions. Are you writing your answers or just speaking? Things like that. Provide a sample of it, yeah, or elicit a sample of it. Again, that point that I mentioned before, rather than just checking can students see the screen you're sharing, ask them what they can see to check. It's another good answer. Demonstrate as well, yeah. Okay, what about this idea of providing opportunities to compare answers to feedback before activities, and the fact that it takes up so much time? Okay, well, going back to this thing, the providing answers, opportunities to compare answers before feedback, I don't think you can do it as much online as you can face-to-face, because it just takes too long. There's all the faffing about of the breakout rooms, and then students kind of getting used to the breakout rooms, then doing it, then bringing them all back. It just takes too long. So I think one little way around this is, as you say, something like a polling link or Padlet. That's quite good. Or just getting them to type their answers into the chat box. That way, while they do the exercise, they type their answers, but they're also able to compare answers with other students as they're typing them in, and reading what other put as well. What about monitoring students' writing? Yeah, all of these tools, Padlet, Google Docs, Blackboard. I think it depends what your, Arshila, I heard you mention Nearpod earlier as well. I'm going to take a look at that in a moment as well. But I think certainly use a collaborative document, something, it depends on the type of writing. If it's a longer type of writing, like an email, then definitely put it on Google Docs and have them type in their answers, and you can monitor as they go, offer corrections, just like you would in a face-to-face classroom. What about pronunciation, drilling new sounds, new words, record and send them? Yeah, I think here, if you're going to do choral drilling, where you say a new word and all the students say it, I think you've got to mute them. So they'll just hear you and then repeat silently, hear you, repeat silently. Otherwise, it becomes just a bit of a mismatch when everyone's trying to talk at the same time. But then you can do a bit, mix that, balance it with a bit of individual drilling as well. So this person, say this word after me. So kind of balancing it that way. Access to materials in breakout rooms. Now, this is something we've already experienced today, isn't it? So you can upload the materials to the chat box and then have students download those. You could send them all of the materials before the lesson. You could use Padlet, which I have. There's a link here. I'll share it again when we come back to it. That's got the next handout that we're going to be using on it as well. Sometimes I ask students just to take a photo as well, if it's a few questions or something. The only problem with taking photos is if people have got their videos on, you need to make sure they all give permission to be photoed. But Padlet is great for that. You can get all your materials on it up there and then share the link, and then they just go back to that and take down the materials that they need. What about assessing students' work? Okay, it is difficult, yeah. Kahoot, I mean, this is very general assessing because you're basically trying to make sure that the students aren't cheating. I think Nikki mentioned this earlier in her talk, and it's about designing the type of assessments that they can't cheat on. I like that idea, 5-minute pop quiz, things like that. And for longer pieces of work, collaborative documents which are shared only with you and them. If you're using something like Moodle or Nearpod, you can actually monitor students' progress while they're doing it. And I'll show you a bit of Nearpod in a while. Maintaining attention. Okay, I think what I've found that I'm doing a lot more is I'm writing key instructions for activities. So rather than just me saying, right, next I want you to do this activity, here's number 1, let's look at an example, that kind of thing. More and more, I'm putting instructions on the slide. So if a student's distracted suddenly while you're instructing, it's there when they come back to it. Use a bit of humour as well, yeah. Short breaks, someone mentioned in the talk earlier as well, always a good idea. Maintaining motivation. Personalised, yeah. Okay, so maintaining motivation, personalisation is great for that. I think also having a clear goal to the lesson and a clear communicative goal, something that students are going to be able to do at the end of the lesson can help with motivation as well. And what about speaking activities when students don't have many ideas? Well, in order to look at this one, I'm going to demonstrate a speaking activity with you, okay? And then you're going to try it as well. And this is a speaking activity called My Lockdown Project. So last year, when we first went into lockdown, my lockdown project, and please don't laugh, was this. Now, as you can see, I'm not going to win any awards for construction, but I can guarantee you it was safe and there were no disasters, I promise. So basically, I got hold of, just before lockdown, a whole load of bricks that someone didn't want. Why did I do this? Well, every summer it's become a bit of a tradition. My family all get together, they all come over to my house, to my garden, and we have a family barbecue. And it's good because a few of us have birthdays in the summer, so we usually kind of combine our birthday celebrations and we have a big barbecue. We all eat way too much, tell each other jokes, catch up, and it's always a really nice time. Obviously, last year, this couldn't happen. because we couldn't meet up. And this made me sad because I was missing my family, and this year was going to be the year I unveiled my brick barbecue. So I thought, do you know what? I'm going to make it anyway, just to give me something to do and a bit of hope that one day we will be able to use this again and get together again. And that, I think that really helped me get through lockdown, because I had this very clear image of something in the future where we could be happy again and some kind of normal again. So I built it. It got a lot of attention from certain family members. This is Poppy, and she obviously loved it, always hanging around. And that was it. It went well. We really enjoyed it. Me and my wife, we ate many a meal on that barbecue. So what I'm going to get you to do in a moment is I'm going to get you in your breakout rooms to talk about your lockdown project. So I want you to think about something that you did during lockdown that you'd like to share with others. Maybe you learnt a new language. Maybe you took up sewing. Maybe you built a brick barbecue, obviously much better and sturdier than me. So before you do that, I'm going to give you a minute or two to think about what you're going to say. Now, if you want, you can make notes or just sit and have a think. Think about these things. What was it that you did? Why did you do it? And how did it go? I had some really interesting and quite moving stories there. Nikki, you said you started baking bread.
Yeah, I started baking bread because for me, the kitchen's relaxing.
Me too. I love cooking. And like you said, I just don't like cleaning. Brilliant. Okay, so that was an example of a speaking activity. Now, for me, speaking activities, so when we wrote Roadmap, one of the very first things we did before we even started writing, was we carried out research into some of our key markets around the world. And the results that we got back from that research, everyone was saying the same thing, that all students eventually want to be able to speak fluently, and that's their primary goal for language learning. But what we also found, that other things are important, like grammar, vocabulary, but the primary goal was to be able to speak English fluently. And also that's one of the most difficult things to teach for various reasons as well. So we came up with this kind of framework for speaking activities, and I'll show you why this was important as well. Basically, there are 5 ingredients, I think, to a successful speaking activity. First and foremost is students need a clear communicative goal. Now, by communicative, I mean a real world goal. So if you interrupt students while they're doing a speaking activity and you say, what are you doing? And they say, we're practicing the present perfect. That's not a communicative goal. That's a language practice goal. If you interrupt them and they say, we're talking about experiences we've had, that's a communicative goal. So things like that, real world goals like that, things like buying things in a shop, buying a ticket, checking understanding, that kind of thing. So that should be our starting point. Another thing that students need for successful speaking is preparation time. So like we had there with the 3 questions, and that can either be silent thinking preparation time, or you can get them to make notes. And I find that just a minute or 2 is exponential. So it provides like another 5 minutes of actual speaking time. It's not so much how long they have on it, just the fact that they have a chance to do it. And that preparation time might involve listening to a model of expert speakers doing the same task. They need the right tools for the task. If we want them to, for example, practice buying a train ticket, we need to give them the phrases that they need for that. And the right tools for the task, the goal comes in the form of vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, some content-based input, so a reading or listening text with information. We need to set them up and give them everything they need to achieve that speaking task. Another ingredient is personalisation, as Ashab mentioned earlier, because students aren't going to run out of ideas if they're talking about themselves, and if they're happy to talk about themselves. And they know more about themselves than anyone else, so they're experts on that topic. So wherever possible, personalisation is key. And also, after speaking, students need a chance to reflect on what they've done. Reflect on what they've done, and almost, if it's even a word, proflect on how they're going to apply the successes that they've had in the future. Let me show you what I mean by each of these in a bit more detail. So for all of the lessons when we were writing roadmap, we started every single lesson with the final speaking goal. What do we want them to do? And we got all of our goals from the GSE, the Global Scale of English. I don't know if you've heard of this or not. It's basically a development of the Common European Framework. So the Common European Framework, a lot of people found that it wasn't specific enough in places. A lot of the goals, can-do statements were quite broad. So the GSE has then developed that and provide hundreds of these clear communicative goals. And if you Google GSE Teacher Toolkit, it will take you to this toolkit, which is great. You can select types of learners, adult learners, young learners, academic learners. You can choose skills. You type in something here, what you want them to do. You can use the slider to narrow it down to level. And you can also do the same for grammar and vocabulary points. But we were starting with the learning objectives, which are these communicative goals. So for example, here, a quick search showed up these things, for example, can ask and talk about very basic symptoms and ailments, can make and accept offers, can use simple everyday polite forms. So each one of the lessons we were writing, we started with one of those goals and then planned backwards, thinking what do students need to achieve this goal. So here, for example, in this lesson, it was describing past experiences, and the grammar tool that best fit with that was present perfect with ever and never, have you ever, and so on. And then some verb phrases for the vocabulary. Now, preparation time, as I mentioned, is key. Here, for example, this is the lesson where they talk about experiences. And for the final task, they play the truth or lie game, where they talk about 2 experiences they've had and 2 which they haven't had, which are false. And then they have to speak and ask questions and find out which is false. So first they listen to an example of Amy and Rob playing the game, and then they prepare themselves. So they choose an experience or use their own one and make notes about them. Then they need the tools for the task. So this is what a typical lesson looks like. You start, as I said, we start with our goal, which here is choosing a place to stay when traveling. And we start with the final speaking task. So they basically choose a place to stay, and then they discuss, and then they compare them, and then they select one. The tools they have are vocabulary, so collocations like airport transfer, breakfast included, things like that. Then they have some content input. So here it's a reading text about 3 interesting places to stay to give them kind of the idea of the kind of thing they're looking at. And then the grammar, we felt superlatives fits this as well, because they're comparing different places and then choosing, for example, the cheapest, the easiest to get to, most comfortable, that kind of thing. And then again, they have their prepare stage. So they listen to people doing the task, then they prepare their own things. There's some information at the back of the book where they can choose different hotels, and then they do it. And they also have some functional language here to help. So as many tools for the task. The idea being that this is 90 minutes worth of material, but if you have a 45-minute lesson, you can still use it, starting with the speaking task, the goal at the end. Then it's a case of time management and selecting which of these tools you're going to have time for. So in that way, it can be adapted because we're starting from the end what we want students to achieve, and then adding as many tools as we can, they can still achieve it with some or all of those tools. Personalisation appears throughout, so it's not just in the speaking task. We can personalise most activities. So for example, this was a vocabulary lesson about weather. Once they've learned these types of weather, sunny, raining, snowy, all that kind of thing, then as a way of kind of freer practice of that vocabulary, they talk about these things. So again, all personalised, and this helps kind of reinforce the language into their own experience as well. More personalisation here after a listening. They listen to these, and then have you experienced any similar situations? So again, integrating it into their own experiences. Same thing with grammar. They've learnt some grammar for future forms, and then as a bit of kind of freer practice, they talk about these situations, again, personalised. And then reflection. So in terms of reflection, there are kind of two aspects to this. So one is, for example, in this speaking activity, play the game with your partner, read sentences, ask questions about them, decide if it's a truth or lie. Then they play the game with a different partner. And then there's this reflection that's sort of built into the task. Who told an interesting true story? Who told an interesting lie? And then in the teacher's book, there are further reflection questions. So what were the 3 most useful phrases you learned in this lesson? In what situations might you use these in the future? So this is getting more down to the nuts and bolts of the language they've learned, getting them to review it, reflect on it, again, re-meeting the language, which helps it integrate, and then looking towards the future, how they might use it and how they might practice it more as well. Then when you come to the end of a unit, you've got these GSE goals that they can then reflect on and say how confident they feel doing each one as well. Something that I've used when adapting these online, which Arshad mentioned earlier, was this site called Nearpod. Now, the great thing about Nearpod is you can create activities which students can either do student-paced in their own time, or you can do as a live lesson, and you as the teacher can monitor them exactly what they're doing while they're working on it as well. So lots of different activities you can create. There's like a game, there's matching pairs, a quiz, fill in the blanks. And then there's other things you can put in like web content, vocabulary videos, BBC videos, lots of different things like that. Let me show you one that I've created. This is for this lesson on possessions. So you can either do it live participation or student pace. I'm going to do it student pace just so you can see what it looks like as a student. Launch a new one. So that gives you a code which students then type into Nearpod, and that brings up the lesson for them. So that's me, Damian Williams. Okay, now you'll notice, as I said before, I find I'm putting a lot more instructions in text on the screen, as this really helps students and stops them getting distracted. So, begin the lesson, nice little warmer. Let's go on a field trip, explore the sale. What possessions can you see? And this brings up a 360-degree photo of a car boot sale, like a flea market. And you can also go into VR if you've got a VR headset. And then, okay, so today we're going to learn how to describe a precious possession in detail. So again, that's repeating the goal. First, let's discuss our possessions. So post 5 possessions which are important to you. Let's say for me, just one, my phone. And students post that and they come up and it's like a notice board. Now we're going to learn to describe some vocabulary for describing lessons. Check you understand these. And then they do a quiz. So these are a pair of oval, elegant, maybe, mirrors, and so on and so on. So anyway, that's Nearpod, and I highly recommend that because that does deal with a lot of the challenges that we've found here. Okay, so I've got a bit of a task for you. This is the task I've got for you. Okay, so I'm giving you some material. This is from roadmap A2 level. And so our starting point, the main goal is describe everyday activities. And for the final task, they need to imagine they're making a change to their lifestyle. Choose one of the topics in exercise A, one of these, and use one of your own ideas. Answer the questions below and how to make notes. What change are you making? How is it different to your usual lifestyle? Now, in terms of the tools for the task, it's the content is a reading about a couple who live off grid for a month. The grammar is the present simple and present continuous, so they can talk about what they do every day in their lifestyle, what they're doing at the moment around now. The vocabulary are, we've got different everyday activities. Play cards, watch TV, have a shower, go to work, start, finish work, that kind of thing. So basically the material here is meant for 90 minutes face-to-face. What I'd like you to do is discuss how you'd adapt it for a 45-minute online Zoom lesson or similar, Teams, whatever you use. I want you to keep these things in mind, and you can use these as a kind of thing to work through it. The main speaking goal of the lesson is describe everyday activities. What specific tools for the task will students need in order to complete this goal? So you won't have time in the 45-minute lesson to use all of the material. So what are you going to use? Are there any other online digital tools that you'll use? How will you ensure students stay motivated? How will you provide opportunities for preparation time, personalisation and reflection? Some of those ingredients of speaking activity. Okay, welcome back everybody. I'm sorry if you didn't get time to finish the lesson, but as I said, the goal wasn't to come up with a final lesson, it's more to think about the processes. I had some really good ideas there, some really good suggestions, so well done everyone. Let me just share this. That's me. This is my website here where there's more information about me. This QR code is for the website. My email address and contact info is on the website, but if you've got any questions about anything today that you want to email me, please feel free to do so. That's my email address there, damianwilliamselt@gmail.com.